Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and we are getting to know our unique 16X long arm, and we are quilting 9 beginner long arm quilting designs. We're going to stitch these out on the quilt panel included with this machine. So let's get started. Let's begin with a quilting design I call Wiggles. It's just a straight line pulling the long arm towards you, then you turn, then stitch a straight line back away from your body. Up and down your quilt. This is a great sashing and border design. It's also the best way to check your thread tension before quilting a real quilt. Wiggles is super simple, but if you vary the height of the curving lines, you can come back with another row and interlock them together. This is a great design to quilt on your first real quilt with your long arm machine. It has a very soft, gentle texture, and if you space the lines a ½ inch to 1 inch apart, your quilt will finish nice and soft too. Once you get a little bored with wiggles, it's time to quilt curves. I'm quilting gently curving lines horizontally in this narrow space. Curving lines are very easy, and when you vary the distance between them, it gives your quilt an interesting organic texture. Gentle curves can also be used to echo other shapes like pebbles or the piecing or applique designs on your quilt. Keeping the lines perfectly spaced can be tricky for beginners, so let's focus more on moving our long arm machine smoothly and slowly rather than quilting perfectly spaced curves. Wiggles and curves are great practice for quilting one of our most popular quilting designs, stippling. The rule for this design is very simple. Stitch a random, meandering, curving line that doesn't cross itself. A good way to quilt this is by stitching repeated soft shapes in a row. As you gain more confidence, add a little bend, an extra wiggle, and work to interlock the rows together. The key with stippling is the random meandering design, but as you can see, I don't quilt this in a random way. I quilt it logically in rows across my quilt until the space is filled. This way, I don't accidentally stitch myself into a corner or have to break thread or travel stitch to escape the space. The more you quilt stippling, the more you'll realize what a great connector design it is. You can use stippling as the connector for different shapes that might fit better with the theme of your quilt. Here I've turned stippling into Wandering Clover by quilting a 3-petal clover shape. Stitch this shape by quilting a figure 8, then add an additional petal on top. Then wiggle off in another direction until you're ready to quilt another clover shape. I like to space these out a bit, but play with this and see how close you like the little clovers to appear on your quilts. Another shape you can quilt with stippling is hearts. I call this lovely stippling and quilt it by stitching a bit of stippling, then flow into a heart shape. Play with which angle you start the heart. You can quilt from the bottom tip of the heart up and around, or it may work better to stitch the heart from the upper dip. Play around with this and see which works better for you. And don't worry about it if your hearts aren't perfect. We don't get better at quilting by ripping out our stitches, so don't stop and rip, even if a heart you quilt ends up looking more like an amoeba. Just keep quilting, and the more repetition you get, the better you'll get. Let's get back to some basic designs inspired by our fabric panel. It may seem super simple, but straight lines are a great way to quilt your quilts. Here I followed the lines printed on the quilt panel and used that as a guide for the design. If you'd rather have more perfectly spaced lines, I recommend learning more about ruler quilting. When freehand quilting like this, you'll always have a little variation in the distance between the lines. I think this gives the design a fun, organic look, and it's a good reminder that our quilting doesn't have to be perfect. If you can quilt straight lines in one direction, you can quilt them in both directions and end up with a grid. Straight line grids can be very formal and elegant, especially when you space the lines equally distanced apart. If you don't want to bother with perfect spacing, try a randomly spaced grid like this. It's a lot of fun and creates some interesting effects when you pair it with curvy designs or applique. Another simple quilting design is zigzags. Here I'm following the zigzags printed on the quilt panel, which are a bit small. When I switched to quilting this design a bit bigger, I found it felt easier. Just watch your speed. With the unique 16X, the machine is designed to stitch at a slower speed, and if you notice flashing lights or a beeping noise, that's a sign you're moving the machine too fast. Now for one of my favorite quilting designs, Pebbling. We have these cute circles printed on the quilt panel, and they are the perfect guide for quilting nicely stacked circle shapes. But quilting circles perfectly requires a lot of practice, so I swing around the circles 2 or 3 times. Be careful that this doesn't get messy and turn into scribbling on your quilt. Scribbling isn't good practice because you're not aiming to quilt anything specific. By aiming to quilt the circles exactly and swinging the long arm around 2 or 3 times, you'll get lots of repetition of the design. I actually use this messy overlap pebbling on organic quilts. I call it underwater rocks because it looks like water ripples over pebbles. Just be mindful of how much time it takes to quilt this design. It's going to be a great choice for small accent areas, maybe through the sashing of a quilt, but far too time consuming to use for edge-to-edge all-over style quilting. So that's it for this video and quilting our 9 beginner long arm quilting designs. Each of these designs are great for quilting blocks, sashing, borders, or edge-to-edge quilting across your entire quilt. So the best way to get to know them is to start with this little panel that came with your Unique 16X long arm. The best way to continue learning is to stitch it on a real quilt. And if you've already gotten your tension balanced and you've gotten some practice with this panel, you're ready to quilt a real quilt. So I hope that this video has inspired you to load up your frame, get started quilting with your Unique 16X. And of course, if you want to learn more about the Unique 16X, come and check it out on my website, leahday.com/16. Until next time, let's go quilt.